I started the same year that Jordan Belfort, the Wolf of Wall Street, started his career, and it was 1987. The industry was pretty crazy back then, and I got swept into the culture. I was doing lots of drugs, drinking, late nights, working extremely hard. I started to develop a lot of anxiety and panic attacks, almost like a nervous breakdown. I was seeing doctors, psychiatrists, psychologists. I was put on medication, and I was in a pretty dark place, so even really questioning whether I wanted to continue on with life. I managed to come across a documentary about a very successful property developer, Bruno Grollo, did high-rise buildings. He was talking about how he used meditation as a tool for his stress management. Everyone is seeking fulfillment. What we want to do is we want to replace one source of fulfillment seeking to another source of fulfillment seeking. And ultimately, everyone is doing the same thing on the planet right now. And they believe that that action, putting bottle tops on bottles, will give you a paycheck, which means you can pay your rent and put food on the table. That will bring you fulfillment. Temporarily might give you fulfillment. We want to look at, is the avenue that we're going down providing us with the fulfillment that we're looking for? Now, in the stress response, you can't produce serotonin and oxytocin. And what happened with meditation was that it changed my biochemistry, and it started producing greater levels of serotonin and oxytocin, which enabled me to feel an internal arising of fulfillment within that replaced the need for me to go seeking it outside of me. The drug craving, the alcohol craving, the distraction craving, addiction, all of that melted away very quickly within days of me doing the meditation practice. That was my journey into meditation, and it was game-changing for me.
Welcome to today's podcast featuring Tom Cronin. Tom is a remarkable transformation coach, meditation teacher, and author. After spending 26 years in the finance industry as a broker, Tom experienced a profound personal crisis that led him to question his purpose and well-being. Battling stress, anxiety, and insomnia, he discovered meditation as a powerful tool for healing and self-discovery. Tom is also producer of an impactful film called The Portal. As a speaker and retreat host, Tom shares his insights and experiences to guide individuals through their journey to attain internal peace and clarity. Join me as we explore Tom's transformative journey. Hi Tom, welcome to Innerhabit. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks. It's a beautiful sunny day here in Sydney.
It is indeed. Working from home today, so it's pretty good. I get the opportunity to interview like-minded people like yourself.
Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Awesome. Look, the topic for today is meditation. You are a meditation expert in Australia, or Sydney even, and I've heard a lot about you and your practices. So to start us off with, tell us a little bit about how you got into meditation, for example.
Yeah, it was interesting. You could say it was by accident, or you could say it was divine intervention. It depends on your level of awareness, I guess. But I was in a pretty dark place. I was working in finance as a broker, and very Wolf of Wall Street. I started the same year that Jordan Belfort, the Wolf of Wall Street, started his career. I was 19. It was 1987. And the industry was pretty crazy back then. And I got swept into the culture. And before long, I was doing lots of drugs, drinking, late nights, working extremely hard. It was fast, it was furious. And this showed up in symptoms in my body. I started to develop a lot of anxiety and panic attacks. And then that morphed into a depression, and that morphed eventually into almost like a nervous breakdown. And I was seeing doctors, psychiatrists, psychologists. I was put on medication, and I was in a pretty dark place. So even really questioning whether I wanted to continue on with life. I just was really at such a deep point of self-loathing and also unhappiness. But I managed to come across a documentary about a very successful property developer, Bruno Grollo. He was talking about how he used meditation as a tool for his stress management. And he actually used a specific type of meditation called transcendental meditation. And for me, I was really into partying and drinking and drugs and getting out of it, which is kind of transcending in a way. And so when I heard that word transcending and meditation put together, it was kind of like an epiphany. It was almost like, oh, this is what I've been looking for. And that's when I started to explore into meditation and Eastern philosophy. And that was my journey into meditation, and it was game-changing for me.
So you're obviously doing all these, I'd say, the wrong things, which you've highlighted drinking, drugs, and so on. How do you get out of those to actually go into the world of meditation? Because that in itself can be such a difficult process. People are addicted to drugs, meds, going through anxiety. How does one go from there to start even thinking about, well, you talked about transcendental, and there was a wake up call for you, I suppose. What then? How do you get unhooked from the
Yeah,
drugs?
it's a really good question. And the answer is that it's spontaneous. And what we want to do is we want to replace one source of fulfillment seeking to another source of fulfillment seeking. And ultimately, everyone is doing the same thing on the planet right now, whether they're playing Sudoku, whether they're going to the gym, whether they're doing crack cocaine, whether they're drinking a bottle of vodka, or whether they're going to work putting bottle tops on bottles. Everyone is seeking fulfillment, and they believe that that action, putting bottle tops on bottles, will give you a paycheck, which means you can pay your rent and put food on the table. That will bring you fulfillment. Doing crack cocaine temporarily might give you fulfillment. But what we want to do is we want to look at, is the avenue that we're going down providing us with the fulfillment that we're looking for? And what I did was I found meditation, and what happened with meditation was that it changed my biochemistry, and it started producing greater levels of serotonin and oxytocin because I went out of the sympathetic nervous system into the parasympathetic nervous system. Now, in the stress response, that's the sympathetic nervous system, you can't produce serotonin and oxytocin, or if you do, it's very minor and very limited, and it depletes very quickly, which means you have to keep going back for more fixes and more fixes, which leads to addiction. But what I found with my daily recurring meditation practice was that I was providing a trickle stream of serotonin and oxytocin into my blood, which enabled me to feel an internal arising of fulfillment within that replaced the need for me to go seeking it outside of me. Now, it wasn't instantaneous where all of a sudden all my addictions and my cravings and desires simply just melted away and I became an enlightened monk. It's an ongoing process, but definitely what I found very quickly was the drug use, the drug craving, the alcohol craving, the distraction craving, the addiction, all of that melted away very quickly within days and weeks of me doing the meditation practice. And one thing that I really liked about the technique that I used, that it had a mantra or primordial vibration that made it very easy and effortless, as opposed to a lot of the meditations that I tried, which was trying to force my mind to be still or focusing on the breath or counting 4 by 4 by 4. All of those just didn't really have the same impact that I found with this deeper style of meditation with a mantra.
Right. And what mantra was that?
Well, we get given a particular sound relevant to when you were born. And so that sound has a particular quality about it based upon the age that you are when you learn to meditate. And there's thousands of different mantras, but we use specific mantras called bij mantras, B-I-J-A. It's a Sanskrit word which means seed. And the mantra is a mantra that takes the mind deeper. So if you use, let's just say, Om Namah Shivaya, it's not a bij mantra. And so it's a repetitive mantra-based meditation where you specifically repeat that mantra with your mala beads time and time again. So we get specific mantras that we keep to ourselves based upon when you were born.
Right. And how does one find this mantra? Do they have to go to a spiritual leader or something?
Ultimately, you'd find a qualified teacher that's trained in the process of delivering the mantra and the technique, because there's a lot more than just getting the mantra. There's a deep understanding about the mechanics of the practice and the long-term benefits of the practice and what might happen as a result of you using this mantra, because it's very powerful in that it puts the body into a very deep state of rest. And when the body goes into deep states of rest, it starts releasing a lot of the stresses that have been accumulating in the body. So you really need a good guide and support system when you're learning this meditation technique. Ideally, you should find a teacher that is qualified and also provides weekly support to his students. Some teachers don't provide that, but having that weekly support really allows you to get ongoing mentoring and support from your teacher. It's a long, ongoing process, and having that support system there is really powerful.
So you've gone through a phase where you were experiencing stress and anxiety through your work, gone through addiction. You've now utilized the chemicals, the 4 chemicals, to create a sense of fulfillment and happiness. Now, a lot of people tend to look at happiness as a mechanism to get and continuously want stuff externally rather than look within themselves, which I believe is more powerful than just obtaining stuff because it's temporary happiness, or temporary happiness. What would you like to say to these people? Like, what has been the difference for you in terms of looking for happiness outside versus within?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's two types of happiness. First, we've got to understand that there's outcome-oriented happiness or fulfillment, and then there's self-referred. So outcome-oriented happiness or fulfillment is one that's derived from an acquisition or an activity. So that is, you go to the races and your horse wins. You haven't acquired anything that day, but you've had an experience, an activity, going to the races, and something good happened. And so what we have deep in our code, in our construct, in our society, in our conditioning, is that we've got a very deep programming that good things will make you feel good and bad things will make you feel bad. So try and avoid the bad things and make the good things happen. And then you internally will feel good. So we're always in this reactive response mode to life circumstances. And that's why we're trying so hard, and why Westfield shopping malls are so full, is because we're constantly trying to buy our way or experience our way to fulfillment. And it's very unsustainable, and it actually leaves us in a very deep state of discontent, because no matter how many things you acquire or how many things you experience, we'll never reach that level of fulfillment that we're quite looking for in that extraction commoditization model of fulfillment. So what we want to do is we want to change that construct and that program and say, my fulfillment is independent of the outcomes and acquisitions. It's something that I cultivate and derive within inside myself. And I'm free from life circumstances. I'm free from the expectations of life. Now, of course, it doesn't mean that certain things that might happen, like my mother and father recently passed. So of course I was affected by that. And of course I went through experiences of grief. So we're not completely immune from life circumstances. We still want to cheer when our horse wins, or, when we win the lotto, or if, something good like your child gets born, or you're at the wedding day and things like that. So we still want to enjoy the delights of life. We just want to liberate ourselves to some degree of the immense levels of suffering and requirement for the external world to work out for us before we can finally feel happy. And so just putting the horse before the cart, enabling us to feel some degree of fulfillment and lightness and joyfulness, regardless of any circumstances in life.
How does meditation help overcome insomnia? A lot of people go through sleepless nights, and I mentioned a situation that had occurred with me over the last couple of years where I did have insomnia. And in that sense, meditation did help me calm the stress and anxiety. So how does meditation help?
It can help in two ways. One is we can have a preventative model and we can have a cure model. So the cure model is, I'm really hyperstimulated. I'm really struggling to fall asleep at the moment. Maybe I'll use a calm app where I've got Matthew McConaughey reading me a bedtime story, and that's going to solve my current problem of I can't fall asleep and I need this to fix my problem right now. What I prefer to do is look at a preventative model, and that is, why have you got insomnia rising in your body? It's probably two reasons. One is that there's a deficiency of melatonin that is releasing into your bloodstream at a relevant point in time, i.e. when you're tired and you should be going to sleep. And that's probably because you're still in the sympathetic nervous system, and your body's trying to protect you from danger. When you're in the sympathetic nervous system, the stress response, it doesn't want you falling asleep if there's a saber-tooth tiger chasing after you or a marauding tribe. So it won't produce the melatonin in those appropriate times, even though you're tired, because it wants to protect you from danger. Now, you might have some uncomfortable situations in life, like going through a divorce, going through some challenges with your builder, going through some financial challenges, or losing your job. And that can activate a similar stress response in your body. And that can deteriorate your ability to actually produce the melatonin and then go to sleep. So we want to continually sustain a deeper level of restfulness throughout the day, so that when we do get to sleep, the body's going, it's okay. Everything, even though there's a lot of turmoil in your life, now's still a good time for you to go to sleep, and it's safe for you to go to sleep. The second thing is that you might just have a really busy mind because you've been doing a lot of emails, you've been in a lot of meetings, you've needed to think a lot that day because of the demands of your work, and you need to process a lot of information. So knowing how to switch the mind off, because you've got a daily practice that trains your ability to master the mind. And I had the worst insomnia. I couldn't sleep for hours every night. And I tried everything from counting sheep to drinking whiskey to all sorts of things. And Eventually, when I learned this daily meditation practice, when I got to sleep, I simply put my head on the pillow. I said, there are no more thoughts. And I had that ability to master my mind and not allow a thought to intrude into the space of the void of my mind. And when there was a void in my mind, we call it being, I could simply fall asleep within 30 seconds. And it was a phenomenal turnaround in my life to be able to fall asleep quite quickly.
So, that state of being that we talk about, or that you're talking about, that gap, a lot of people say that when you experience that gap, there is this level of joy, unexplainable joy that you have. Can you sort of explain that? I sometimes find that when I'm in that state of being, I find that I do sense some joy. I sense some peace and happiness. So, what's going on and why does that happen?
There's a lot of science behind this now, and we can look at, if you were to Google the love frequency chart, and what you'll find is a frequency chart that measures the hertz, Hertz. This is the vibrational frequencies of particular states that we can experience. And if you look at shame, guilt, anger, hatred, they're really low frequencies between 20 to 50 hertz. And if you look at the highest frequencies, so love is around 500, but even higher than that, we have enlightenment around 700 to 1000. So it's a very high frequency. And just below enlightenment is peace, which is 600 hertz. And so peace is actually what prevails when we clear everything else out. It's quite interesting. Peace isn't something you achieve by getting something, peace is what you achieve by removing everything else. And as you said, you get this level of joy when there's spaciousness or clarity or clearness in the mind. And the thing with peace is it's a hard one to sell. You won't see many ads for companies trying to sell peace, because what people want are excitation. They want that new car, that new, toothpaste, or the new hairstyle, to give them some degree of stimulation. But peace is actually the lack of stimulation. And then from peace, we get joy, we get love, and we get bliss. So love, bliss, and joy are the remnants, I believe, of what comes through peace.
You mentioned enlightenment just there, and you mentioned it a couple of times now. So tell us what your definition of enlightenment is. I've seen so many people think that enlightenment is just going to be an amazing place, and that once you reach it, there's going to be no pain, no suffering, or that you're just going to experience something different. And I think that's a wrong perception that people have. So, what, in your view, is enlightenment?
I think there's a few components to enlightenment. I think it's definitely partly that, what you're saying. We know it's the realization of our true nature, which is that we're the divine being, currently expressed in a physical form. We identify with our thoughts, our feelings, and our physicality as a perception of who we are, but it's really a temporary construct that we're currently occupying. But what is it that's occupying it, or what is pervading through it? And that is the omnipresence of Supreme Being, or the divine, some would call it even source. And so enlightenment is the realization of that, the lightness of being. So that's one component to it, which is this blissful, loving peacefulness that prevails through your experience of daily life. But it's also the wisdom that's preserved, attained, realized within that quality of being. So you start to have much more wiser appreciation and understanding of life. We call it the Sangita in Sanskrit, the knower knowing the known. So you become the knower, which is in the process of knowing what is already known, and this is knowledge or wisdom itself. And so you become more of a custodian and a representative of that knowledge and wisdom. And this is another wonderful quality that comes with the state of enlightenment. Now, just to go into more granular details about enlightenment sounds a very definitive thing. You're either in it or you're not in it. I'd prefer to call it enlighteningment. So you're in the process of becoming enlightened. And we're all in that process, whether we're fully enlightened or marginally enlightened or not enlightened at all. We're still in the process of realizing our true nature, which is that we're already enlightened. We just realize it or not realize it. That's the difference.
Where did you commence your practices? You have a lot of Sanskrit knowledge. I'm assuming you have a lot of knowledge on the Bhagavad Gita and various texts as well. So, where did this all begin for you?
I studied here in Australia and in India, in Rishikesh, and I studied with a great Sanskrit scholar, a man named Tom Knowles, who's American, but he studied under the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, and it was part of the Vedic lineage. And his knowledge of the Vedas and his knowledge of Sanskrit is quite impeccable, particularly for a Westerner. So he is a very prolific exponent of Sanskrit, and so I learned a lot of my Sanskrit through him. Thank goodness. It's such a beautiful language, and hopefully in the Western world we can integrate and appreciate and understand more of Sanskrit over time, because it's such a powerful language.
Okay, and then how long were you in India for?
I wasn't there long, unfortunately. I'd love to go back and spend more time there. I was doing part of my teacher training up there in Rishikesh, and I fell ridiculously in love with Rishikesh, particularly the beautiful big sweeping sandy beaches on the edge of the Ganges, and the large puja ceremonies that would be held down at the Ghats on the edge of the river. So it was a very special time to be at the foothills of the Himalayas.
I haven't been there, so I have been to India, but Rishikesh, I've never been there. Something I really want to do in the future.
Special place.
It is indeed. What practical tips would you have for somebody looking to incorporate meditation into their daily routine?
There's two steps to it. Firstly, I would find a qualified teacher and learn the art of meditating with that teacher, either in person or, worst case scenario, if they can't access that teacher in person, they could learn. Some teachers provide it through Zoom, which I do. The second thing is understanding the mechanics of your day. The biggest pushback people have with meditation is that I don't have time. And so we then break it down and say, okay, well, what do you have time for? And what we find is that every day has 24 hours and every hour has 3 portions of 20 minutes, which means that your day comprises of 72 20-minute pieces of pie. And if you did a pie chart, you'll find that there's 72 20-minute pieces of pie that are all allocated to finding fulfillment. And so we ask people, how's your allocation of your 72 20-minute segments of pie going? Is it working out for you? And if they say, I'm a fist pumping hell yeah life, then you would say, keep doing what you're doing. And if you'd say, I'm actually not quite there yet. I feel that no matter how hard I try, no matter how many things I acquire, no matter how good my life is, I just can't seem to reach that level of fulfillment and peace that I'd really like to get to. And so then you say, well, look, if you want to keep doing what you're doing, but just take 2 out of 72 20-minute pieces of pie, then what you're going to find is you're going to have better sleep, you can have better happiness, better levels of love and compassion, greater levels of peace inside you. And you're going to find that life around you is going to start to flow a lot more smoothly as a result of your internal state, which is being more peace and calm. And then at that point, there's a much easier transition to allowing 20 minutes of meditation into their day.
So you recommend 20 minutes per day?
Twice a day.
To see the benefits?
Ideally twice a day.
Twice a day. 20 minutes twice a day.
And look,
Okay.
just
20 minutes, ideally twice a day.
Yeah. And on that, a lot of people, like I was the same. I said to my teacher, dude, like I'm a broker, I'm a busy guy. There's no way I could fit that into my day. I've got big lunches to do, and, I've got marketing of clients, and, I've got a house to build and all these different things. And I really sat with the knowledge and the science after the course and thought about it and realized that there was the potential for this to change my life. And one thing that as I dived deeper into enlightenment and some of these very wise sages that have lived on the planet over the history of time, I came across a book called The Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. And the book's not about enlightenment at all. The book's about people that were very successful. Your David Beckhams of the world, your Donald Bradmans of your world, your Yo-Yo Ma's of the world, the people, the Tiger Woods, the Williams sisters. And what he found was that there was an underlying principle that led people to become outliers in society. And he called it the 10,000 hour principle, and that every person that was extremely successful in any field had allocated a hugely disproportionate amount of time to becoming successful in that. He called it the 10,000 hour principle. Now, when we look at enlightened people who achieved the highest levels of the human experience, as far as not that they climbed mountains and won tennis matches, that they reached a pinnacle of fulfillment and bliss and joy and almost ecstasy in their experience of life. And we can see one correlating attribute to them reaching that state, and that was the 10,000 hour principle. They just spent a lot of time in meditative states. they spent less time drinking alcohol, going to the horse races, scrolling through TikTok, going to the shopping mall, watching fluffy TV. They just spent their time differently than most people. And so if we can just take a little bit of that and just squeeze into your day, in amongst the TikTok and the races and the drinking, 20 minutes of meditation twice in the day, once in the morning, once in the afternoon, then you'll find that your life will improve quite substantially.
Okay, how does an individual practice 20 minutes twice a day and go from, all those monkey, they call it monkey mind, lots of thoughts, to actually having a lot of clarity and gaps within their thought patterns so that they can feel more fulfilled? How long does it take to get there?
Look, most of my students I tend to find within the weekend course, that's 2 days, they start noticing substantial differences. By the end of the first week, we tend to find people generally have noticed quite a significant difference, as was the case for me. And then within a month of sustaining that practice, they've really started to see a big shift happening in their life.
Okay, and you have specific courses designed for specific people, or is it just different packages?
It's all the same. So everyone goes through the same course.
Okay, so it's
one
just
course,
one
yeah.
course,
Yeah.
essentially.
And I run them monthly.
What are the common challenges that you hear about when people begin to practice meditation outside of, my thoughts? What other issues come up and surface?
Usually there's 3 barriers. One is I couldn't do it, I have too many thoughts. The second one is I don't have time. And the third one is I can't afford it. And all of those are understandable. And there's a way around all of those obstacles or objections if people have them. A lot of it comes down to predominantly their level of enthusiasm and inspiration and commitment to wanting to make a change. I asked one lady who had a big issue about making a financial exchange for the expertise that teacher provided and the time that teacher provided. Yet she had just recently had a $9,000 holiday to Paris, standing in a queue to see a painting on a wall for 3 hours. And so it comes down to values. She spent that $9,000 to see that painting on the wall to provide some degree of fulfillment. Now, the challenge was that fulfillment had eroded very quickly once she got home and saw the bank balance, and next thing she had a stressful day at work because the viewing of that picture hadn't provided any long-standing value in her life when it came to a deterioration of her life because of some stress response. So really helping people understand, and this is what this podcast, I guess, is all about, is helping people understand the core values, which is spending money to get fulfilled, and how is that long-term investment playing out for you, and where are you allocating your time and your money to that experience of fulfillment seeking.
Now, I've noticed on your website that you're looking to get over 1 billion people to meditate. How's that journey going for you?
Well, if your podcast blows up and becomes really huge, then that will definitely help a lot. So I'm putting it in your hands now.
Pressure's on, pressure's on.
Pressure's on, yeah. Look, it's an ongoing, it's funny when I sat down with my marketing team to come up with the brand and the business and the message to market. And my intention was to inspire 1 million people to meditate. I figured if I could get 1 million people meditating, I think that would have a very positive effect on the world. And they said, you could inspire 1 million people to meditate in 5 years. And interestingly, after 5 years, I had definitely been exposed to millions and millions of people with my message through companies like Mind Valley and Mind Movies, and through my film and a number of other organizations that had shared my insights and wisdom out to the world. So they said, you need to set a bigger target because this should be a 50-year goal. And so it's not like I have a Geiger counter on my website and I'm deeply attached to the outcome. It's more just a subtle intention that will inspire me through the work that I do to make a difference in the world. And I do see that when people start meditating, they definitely don't become perfect. I'm definitely not perfect and still make erroneous decisions, but I think we become better, we become kinder, we become more aware of our surrounds and the impact we're having on the world. And I think that's something that the world definitely needs at the moment.
Definitely agree with that. So tell me, how and what made you want to go into coaching, particularly a meditation coach?
Well, what I teach for a lot of, I support a lot of yoga teachers and meditation teachers and breath workers and healers to grow their businesses. And one thing I found by default over time with my business is that I saw the meditation teaching as like the trunk of the tree. And then all these branches started to come off the tree, like running retreats, like corporate trainings, keynote presentations, coaching people. And so by default, I started to create an extensive business model around teaching meditation that had other limbs of it. And this is what I teach my clients now is how to actually build businesses that have multiple limbs. Even just yesterday, I was mentoring one of my students in my Zen Academy, which is a coaching program for spiritual leaders. She had a very one-dimensional business in that she taught meditation and did sound baths or sound healings. And I said, you're very limited because your experience and your audience can only be in a very close-knit community, and you're limiting your capacity to scale your business and impact more people around the world. So we started to build more limbs of her business by adding retreats, by adding coaching, by adding keynote presentations and corporate trainings, so that she could get more depth in that business model and obviously sustain herself more financially, but also provide her community with further opportunities. Even just in a week's time, I'm going to be in Bali with 25 people running a retreat. And again, that's an extension of taking people from meditation into a deeper immersion and giving them the opportunity to work with me further.
What does the retreat entail? What should people expect from it? A lot of people go into retreats thinking, I should have an expectation. There should be a return for me. So what would you like to say to people who have that expectation?
There's two parts of that. One is what do we do on the retreat? And the second one is what is the outcome of the retreat? So what we tend to find is the outcome of the retreat. People tend to feel a lot lighter. They feel a lot more inspired about life, a lot more positive about life. They have clearer purpose. They have clearer direction. And they feel liberated from a lot of the stresses and traumas and the deficiencies that accumulated in their body. There's a lot of purifying that happens on the retreat. So the process is quite intense. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's not sitting around all day on deck chairs reading books and drinking virgin pina coladas. We go through a process using yoga and breath work and meditation and some workshops and some talks and some delicious, amazing, wholesome food that helps on all levels purify their mind, body, and spirit.
Should people have expectations when they go into retreats, or should they not?
I think definitely you should. I mean, if you're going to spend, $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 or more to go on a retreat, then you want to get a return on investment. For me, that's absolutely critical that I provide them with that return on investment where they go home and they go, my goodness, that was the best money I could have possibly spent. And that's, as anyone that's getting a Netflix subscription, you have an expectation you're going to get TV and movies and documentaries provided to you in a constant stream. And there's an expectation for that exchange. If you go to the hairdresser, you want an expectation that you're going to get a hairstyle done that you would appreciate and make that value exchange. So you definitely, anytime you're doing a value exchange, you should always have an expectation you get what you want. No different from your own personal situation that you went through recently. You want an expectation for delivery of that service, and if it doesn't meet your expectation, then you might want to have a few words about why you didn't get it.
So can you share a success story that you had or you've had recently, whether it's in a group or even individual?
Yeah, all the time. I mean, it's just thousands of testimonials that I get from my clients. For instance, I had a student or a lady coming to my introductory talks called Cynthia that was going through really difficult times. She was in a very abusive relationship. She was riddled with anxiety and stresses. She was in a job that she didn't like. And she learned to meditate. She started to change her internal state. She started to become more sovereign, more empowered. And she found that her life in general started to become better and better and better because the outside world responds to our inside world as opposed to our inside world responding to the outside world. But I see thousands of people whose lives change for the better once they start going through my retreats or through my meditation courses or my coaching, where they get a lot more clarity, a lot more direction, a lot more empowerment about the life that they want to create as opposed to the life by default they're getting created for them.
Right. Now, that's a very good question. So there are a lot of people who actually do venture into meditation knowing that they want to focus on themselves their inner selves, and then they discover that this job might not be right for them or this career isn't right for them. However, they're still fearful of taking that next step. How does one come out of a state where, for example, they don't like the boss or they're having issues at work, meditate, get clearer mind, but actually fear starting their own business or want to grow their own niche or whatever?
Yeah, Tim Ferriss has a quote that he says that we would rather be unhappy than go through change.
That's right.
And that's something that I struggled with for many, many years. And there's a few reasons for that. And it's not to dismiss that. Part of the reason people would rather be unhappy and not go through change is because they'd rather be unhappy but safe. And so you might feel, for instance, I was unhappy in my job, but I was safe in my job because it provided with an income stream that could feed my family. And so it's not so black and white that you should just jump into some unknown with some randomness. There is some degree of needing to have Maslow's hierarchy, the foundation of life established of being safe, secure, and that might mean being in a job that you might not necessarily like for a period of time. And you might need to reconcile with that, but that job provides you with safety and security, and you're willing to forego, in some exchange, the happiness for the safety. And that's something that I definitely grappled with for quite some time, particularly having a family to feed and living in Sydney, as you know, is not cheap. But sometimes we just have to also trust that that leap into that unknown, we will be supported in some way. And if you can really weigh up what is the worst case scenario, you'll generally find that it's okay to make that leap into the unknown. Transition's always hard, transitioning from one house to the next house, from one relationship to the next relationship, from one job to the next job. Once we've made the transition, we're in the new job, we're in the new relationship, we're in the new house, everything's all good. But the transition itself is always a bit murky, a bit uncomfortable. And that's the gray area that we tend to not want to traverse across that threshold. So one thing that I do with a lot of my clients who are making those transitions, particularly from a corporate job to a fulfilling, purpose-filled job, is letting go of the need for everything to have to work out before you take that leap, but trusting that things will work out in some way, shape, or form after you make the leap, and the universe will support you in some way, shape, or form. It might not be what you expect, it might not be how you had envisioned it, but usually it's going to be better than what you thought.
That's really good, Tom, because yes, I do agree. So, whenever you start a new venture, it's never going to start at 100% perfect. You're going to have to grow it, and it will evolve and change as you grow it.
Yeah, when I left finance, I walked away from a multiple six-figure salary into teaching meditation, which was not a great career move financially. And then I made some poor business decisions as well, which compounded things. And it was a really difficult time. There's no question about it. It wasn't an easy transition. But would I do it again? I probably would do it again, probably do it differently. Now you learn lessons. And this is the one thing, we have to learn to be okay with making mistakes. We have to be okay, or learn to be okay with things not working out how we had anticipated, but learning through that not working out and learning through the challenge of it. And so we tend to want to make life so safe and so known that it backs us into a corner of not taking risks anymore and not trusting the process that I'm going to learn no matter what happens through this process. And hopefully by making those mistakes, I'm going to get better. And we've become very precious these days, which means that we're becoming very insecure and very vulnerable because we're so afraid of stepping into the unknown. If you think about what it was like, 200, 300, 500 years ago, where they didn't know whether that food, it didn't have a barcode and ingredients on the back of the packet. So they didn't know what they were eating. They didn't know if it had gone off. It didn't have an expiry date. And so it was unknown all the time in their lives. And we've become so safe by removing as many unknowns from our life that it's backed us into a bit of a corner. We're becoming more anxious and more afraid than ever before, just about.
Yes, and if you look at it in terms of the statistics, there's a lot of anxious people, stressed out people out there today, particularly like you said, because it's so expensive in Sydney. It's not only Sydney, I hear stories abroad as well where people are struggling.
Yeah, my teacher used to tell us to do a practice. Firstly, obviously, meditate, which helps us become more fearless and embrace the unknown and increase our adaptive capacity. One of the things that we're losing is adaptive capacity because that is what's causing stress. They used to tell us to go to the main central train station in your capital city and have no intention or idea as to where you're going, but to jump on a train, an interstate train, or one of the rural trains, not the one that just goes around your city and plonks you back into your nice, safe enclave, but one that will take you potentially for quite a few hours, a long way from your safety zone. And just to learn to be adaptive. And when it gets to the end of the line, get off the train and go, where on earth am I? Find a local hotel or hostel or accommodation, stay there for the night. Just take a toothbrush and your wallet. This was before phones, and learn to be in uncomfortable situations. Train yourself just on a Saturday night, just or a Saturday afternoon or Sunday morning. Do these types of experiences to almost help yourself become more adaptive and to navigate through the unknown a little bit better. I never did it, but I think it would have been good to have done.
I totally agree with you. I don't know if I've done it. I think I may have. I know my husband's done it. He traveled from Brisbane to Sydney randomly about when he finished his university degree, and he had no direction, no focus, no nothing. He went apple picking, got into Sydney and never left, and changed his whole life.
Yeah, I love that. Just trusting it. When I was younger, I was 18 years old. I just finished high school, and I bought a ticket to travel. You could get what's called a Ural ticket, and it was like an unlimited travel across Europe. It was like $400, and I had no plans at all. I just literally started from UK. I got a ferry over to France, and from Calais, I think it was, I started my journey across Europe, and I had no itinerary. This was before Google. It was before TripAdvisor, before we had iPhones. We didn't even have mobiles, and so I had a map. I remember arriving in a city and getting the map from the tourist venue and looking at this map laid out on a park bench and having to work my way through random streets and find locations to stay and eat. And I had 3 days where I went where I didn't have any money, and there was a couple of nights I had to sleep on a train station. But it taught me resilience, and it taught me how to have gumption. We'd never hear that word in our world. Grit, gumption, and determination. These are the things that we're missing, I think, in our world a lot.
Indeed. So I believe that these practices of meditation should be taught from a very young age. How should we encourage, or what should we teach our children to encourage them to meditate on a regular basis?
Well, through my personal experience, I agree with you. It'd be great to give children the opportunity to meditate. Very few kids want to meditate because they haven't finished exploring the outside world. It's not until we hit 30, 40, 50 that we're like, you know what, I've tried to extract fulfillment out of this world. I'm done with it. There must be a better option. And that's when people come to me, or that's when I started as well. And they go, there must be something, and that's on the inside world. So we tend to find very few children are enthusiastic about exploring the inner world because they're still bright-eyed and bushy-tailed about the outside world. And that's okay. What I think is more important for me personally is having less stressed parents that are in domestic violence, that are using substances to get through a difficult time, that are mean or abusive to the kids, that aren't really committing to the family unit and looking at, providing a sense of safety and security for that family unit. These are the things that I think is what's missing in the fabric of our society more than anything else. So for me, I think we still have too many stressed parents, because you can have a kid that's meditating, but if their parents are completely stressed, using substances, alcohol, screaming and shouting at each other, not grappling with financial challenges very well, or differences in the relationship very well, then all the meditation in the world's not going to help that kid. And my primary objective is to make sure that we have less stressed parents. Kids grow through osmosis. That's one of the big ways that they evolve. And if they've got a dad that's yelling and screaming, then that's just something that they absorb. It's something that they learn. If they've got a mum that's, sticking a finger up at people in the traffic because they're pulled in front of her, then they just see that and they learn through observation more than anything. So again, creating an environment around them that they can learn from, less about meditation, more about, that's an appropriate and relevant way to behave as an adult, then maybe that's given me some guidance for me as a child to grow through life.
It's fair enough. That's a good teaching, to be honest. How does meditation help neurodiverse individuals?
That's a really good question. tend to identify with many layers of who we are, the gender, the color of our skin, the shape of our nose, the way we have tonality in our voice, the accents we use, the political persuasions of our family. And these are all perceived measuring rods for an identity. The thing is that these measuring rods, they're different for everyone. And if we're using these as measuring rods for who we are, we're missing a really big component about our truth. And where meditation comes in is by transcending the perceived temporary measuring rods of who we are and identifying with a part of us that is non-changing. And it's a part of us that is consistently the same in everyone. This is what we call omnipresence. It's present in everyone, and it's present in everything. And it's a non-changing quality that is pervasive of all reality. Some call it the divine, some call it God, some call it the higher self. And in quantum mechanics, quantum physics, we can also call it something else, the unified field. And so where we have a lot of problems in the world, a lot of discrimination, a lot of pain, is that we have a lot of people disconnected to that underlying true state of who we are. And we're identifying our identity, our personality, our perception of who we are based upon these measuring rods that are very temporary, very subjective. And I think that's causing so much misery and suffering. When we identify with being itself, then that's where we get freedom, and that's where meditation comes in.
Understood. Now, what role does mindfulness play in your day-to-day work or life?
So meditation helps me become more established in the silent witness. We call this Sakshi Kutashta in Sanskrit, which means that there's a silent witness that is witnessing my thoughts, my words, my actions. And the silent witness is something that is always there, and it's not affected by the circumstances of life. And when we have more and more direct contact and establishment in the silent witness, we're able to then be a little bit more discerning and non-reactive, more proactive with the words that we're using, the actions that we're taking, the things that we're creating. So mindfulness is what I do outside of meditation, and meditation helps me cultivate mindfulness.
Right. And what mindfulness practices can you do on a day-to-day basis to create that present moment awareness?
So when you're eating, be aware of what you're eating and how you're chewing and what the taste is of that on your taste buds. And when you digest it, be aware of the digestive gastric juices that are breaking down that food. When you're driving, be mindful of how you're driving. When you're walking, be mindful of how you're walking. Are you in your head in some future or past scenario while you're walking? Or are you feeling your footsteps pressing down onto Mother Earth as she supports you with the pressure of gravity pressing into Mother Earth while you're walking? And while you're lying in the sun, feel Surya, the beautiful rays, thousands and millions of miles away, traversing across the ether and giving your skin a beautiful tinge of vitamin D as it infuses into the cells of your body through the pores of your skin. These things are happening all the time, but we're so oblivious to it. So mindfulness helps us be more present in the moment.
How does that help you grow spiritually? Because I know that creating this present moment awareness tends to help you get closer, I suppose, to what we call moksha or even enlightenment. Would you agree with this? And how does it help?
Yeah, you mentioned a beautiful word, moksha, M-O-K-S-H-A for those listening. It's a freedom from the binding effects of life. And the thing with spirituality is that spirituality is only present. It's nowhere else but now. And so mindfulness meditation are vehicles or methodologies to help us cultivate what already is. It's just that we have spiritual, physical, mental, and emotional, these 4 layers of reality. And the subtlest, of course, is spiritual. The densest is physical. Then we have emotional, then we have mental. But spiritual is only a reality that exists now. And we can be spiritual in the moment by being mindful of us being spiritual in the moment.
How do you
I don't know if I
balance
answered
your...
that question.
Oh, no, it's okay. I think you did.
Okay.
Yeah. How do you balance your day-to-day role as a teacher, a coach? You're also an author, and your own personal practices.
Yeah, it's always the challenge is where we get to a particular point as we cultivate our capacity to provide more value to the world by reducing the part of us that is always in need. So that's the ego is always looking to narcissistically provide its own, satiated fulfillment through acquiring things and activities. But as we become less of that, we become more of the unbounded capability of being able to provide more and more. And so we find ourselves naturally thrust into greater roles of leadership and service. But then once we get too thrust into that and we reduce and diminish using the tools that we use to get to that capability, then we diminish our role as a leader. So it's finding that sweet balance of being a leader that provides great value to the world, but also putting time aside for the important things that matter, which is your daily practice, your personal hygiene, your family and friend time, your exercise time, your food time, and pleasure time. So it's everyone has a packed day. Everyone's doing something, whether you're scrolling through TikTok for 4 hours, or whether you're going to the gym or sitting in an ice bath or meditating or spending time with your family. And it's about finding that balance of all those components that make your life feeling very rich, very healthy, very sustained, very joyful, very loving. And for me, I definitely put time aside for family meal times. It's a really important part of our family. We love cooking delicious meals and celebrating that meal together as a family. I love slobbing out on the sofa after that meal with my family, watching some fluffy television. These are parts of my day that are all rich and valuable just as much as it is sitting in meditation for extended periods of time, or sitting in an ice bath, or going to the gym, or going to the sauna and teaching my clients. They're all part of all added value in some equal portion.
So you've also produced, I believe, a short movie or a movie from memory. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's a feature documentary, 90-minute film.
That's right. Tell us more about what made you produce that documentary.
Well, I was very inspired by The Secret. The Secret did something really quite remarkable. It took a very esoteric subject, the law of attraction, which was very new to the world. We hadn't really come across that at that point in time very much. We had Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, but not much more had really covered the idea that what you think and what you feel can lead to what you attract into your life. And they made this mainstream. They penetrated the households of the world. And that really inspired me to follow suit with a film about meditation. And so that was the starting point for the idea of the film. It was initially called The Stillness Effect, which I kind of wish I'd run with in the long run. But it changed over time and morphed and shifted over time and became The Portal. And The Portal being that transcendent experience that happens in meditation. It was a bit of a mainstream sci-fi sort of title, and I wish I'd sort of, in hindsight, changed it back to The Stillness Effect. But in the end, we have this beautiful, rich film that showcases the power of meditation to help people move through crisis. And they can watch that for free off our website.
That's right. I've registered and I've started watching it since. It's a great documentary. I'm just going to go slightly back. You mentioned service previously when we were looking at balancing your personal growth as well as balancing day-to-day activities with your coaching business and so on. What is service? I think a lot of people get it wrong that service is always giving, and so I actually find that that's a misconception. So is there anything you'd like to say about what service is really?
It's a really good question, isn't it? It can be perceived that I'm in service when I'm teaching meditation or running a retreat, but really I'm doing a job. For me, now that you've asked the question, I hadn't really thought of it, but now that I'm here at this particular point, I would say that a lot of what I'm doing isn't service, it's doing a job. And I'm making a quantifiable exchange where someone says, I will pay you for your time and expertise, and the thing that's going to make a difference in my life, which is why we buy Coca-Cola or why we watch Netflix, and we make an exchange for that. But service for me is something that we do from compassion, from love, as we can do that in our job as well. So I'm doing that as well when I'm teaching meditation, running a retreat, but there's an exchange. I think service is something we call a bhakti, devotional service, which is coming from that foundation of love. So for me, brushing my father's hair and spoon feeding him when he was in an aged care facility, doing up the buttons on his shirt and holding his hand as he walks across the floor to the table to sit down for dinner. These were acts of service. And I think we should all have in our life, in some way, shape, or form, on a regular, consistent basis, the acts of service. I think it's a beautiful, heart-opening experience, whether it's going to an aged care facility or a pet, what do you call it when animals are in a shelter, a pet shelter, animal shelter. Or for me, for a while, I was doing planting trees. And that was something that I did out of love for the planet, out of love for humanity, because I knew that more oxygen from the trees and less carbon dioxide will be better for us as a species. Then I went into a soup kitchen where every Saturday morning I provided service there, where I wasn't paid, but it was out of love and devotion to the homeless people that didn't have enough food to eat or shelter. So I think there's something really rich and rewarding, partly for you, but also for the receiver of your service. And I think, it's something that I think is part of the human experience that makes us feel more complete when we have acts of service in our day.
Thanks for that, Tom. What books would you recommend, or even apps would you recommend to people who are meditating or getting into meditation?
I think if it's to learn meditation, I think it's best to go with a teacher in some way, shape, or form in person. If it's to enhance your life, I think a great book will be the Portal book that I wrote co-wrote with a beautiful human being, Jackie Pfeiffer. And I think a great book by Deepak Chopra is The 7 Spiritual Laws of Success. Anything by Deepak's great. I think also a great book by Eckhart Tolle, The Power of Now and A New Earth. Those are 2 brilliant books that people should read that are going to help them. And then I think that Conversations with God by Neil Donald Walsh was a big impact in my life as well. There's a few books to get people started.
Where to from here, Tom? You're teaching individuals how to meditate, you do workshops, you also present, I assume, in larger groups, organizations. Where is life taking you?
It's taking me 2 directions. One is I want to spend a lot more time just on the land, on a farm, and growing vegetables and fruit trees and spending time with my partner and my dog and with planet Earth, and a lot more of quietness and solitude. But also, interestingly, in the polarity of that, to find some balance, I find myself running bigger retreats and doing bigger work with bigger organizations, large companies. Recently spoke at Boston Consulting Group and working with Amazon and Coca-Cola. So I find myself in this sort of interesting dynamic of pulling back into quietness, but also being thrust into bigger roles to impact more people in the world. So I'm looking to run more retreats, looking at Dubai, maybe the Philippines, and definitely we've got one happening in the USA next year. Bali's happening in a couple of weeks, next week actually. So a few things in that sort of impact more people, but also have some quieter times on the land as well. I find that balance is a really nice balance.
Awesome. Look, I'd like to thank you for today. You've given a lot of our viewers and a lot of our listeners a lot of insight into not only your life and how you transitioned into meditation, but also given them, I suppose, an idea as to how to get into it. And I appreciate that, because not a lot of people know that they should go with a meditation expert. I think that's where a lot of people go wrong. They try to do it on their own. And then when it doesn't work, it's hands up in the air and say it doesn't work. Whereas if you have a proper meditation teacher who can guide you through those experiences, it actually transforms that experience and helps you delve deeper into meditation. So firstly, thank you for that. I appreciate your time. You've taken some time out to speak to the audience, so thank you so much. And it's been great having you on the show.
It's been great to hear. Great questions. And thanks everyone for joining in and listening and tuning in. And reach out anytime if you want to connect in. I look forward to hearing from people that are all around the world that have heard my message in some way, shape, or form. So I look forward to connecting in with them. And thanks for inviting me today, Shruti.
No worries. Look, I'll leave you links in the description so that they can connect with you. The best way is obviously via your website.
That's right. Either Tom Cronin website, tomcronin.com, or Instagram is another good place they can find me. I love to respond to all my message on Instagram, so I'm very involved and engaged on Instagram at Tom Cronin, one word.
Excellent. Thank you, Tom. Appreciate it.